important to us to hear from different perspectives in the sector. People are at different stages with their companies, with their careers, with their thinking, and I'm really excited about the group that we put together today. I'm going to introduce them, and as I introduce you, I'm going to ask them to come up to the stage, and then we can give them a big round of applause all together. Unfortunately, Amin Palzaban of Topic Flow wasn't feeling well, so he's not able to join us tonight. But we do have Josh Nilson. He's Métis and from Willow River, BC. He's the founder of Maskwa Investments, which focuses on early stage and seed funding and advice with a focus on Indigenous tech businesses. Prior to that, he was the founder of Eastside Games, making mobile games like Trailer Park Boys, The Office, RuPaul, Drag Race Superstar, and more. Josh has been working in tech since 2002 and was named Person of the Year 2022 at the BC Technology Impact Awards. Josh, you want to come on up? Ann Stevens is the Vice President of Business Development and leads partnering and business strategy at AbCellera, a company focused on antibody discovery and development technologies. Recently, she helped AbCellera secure a $701 million co-investment with the provincial and federal governments to strengthen capabilities and infrastructure for drug development, manufacturing, and clinical research in Canada. Ann is an active member of the life sciences ecosystem and serves on the board of directions of Life Sciences BC. Come on up. Alison Taylor began her entrepreneurial journey in 2011 by opening a multidisciplinary healthcare clinic called Canopy. Running and owning a small business taught Allie the foundations of business, along with a deep empathy for the life of a small business owner. In 2014, she and her co-founder, Trevor, launched a new business called Jane, which provides software to run healthcare practices and is currently used by more than 150,000 practitioners around the world and employ more than 450 people, with Allie serving as co-CEO. Come on up, Allie. Bring your wine. We welcome that at BetaKit events, wine for everybody. And finally, we have Scott Langille, who also grew up in northern BC and moved to Vancouver to study computer science and business at UBC, hoping to learn the skills to make a dent in the world. Isn't that all what we're all trying to do, make a little dent in the world? While studying, he founded and sold an AI-driven user research startup in Toronto. He then left Canada to explore San Francisco and Southeast Asia while working internships as a software developer and product manager at companies like Tesla. Recently, Scott returned to Vancouver, where he hosts Atelier, a community that has attracted hundreds of young people to work on passion projects alongside each other at weekly co-working sessions. Let's have a big round of applause for our panel. Everybody. Do I need to turn this on? You guys hear me? Okay. I host a lot of panel discussions for somebody who inherently doesn't like panel discussions. So we're going to do this a little bit differently. We're going to kind of run the line. I want to showcase some stories of Canadian tech, and I want this group to hear a little bit about what each one of you has been doing. We were talking backstage around the kind of stories that we hear in the sector and in Canada. They're not always positive. Sometimes they focus too much on one thing. There is not one story of success in Canada. There's not one way of doing things. And I think part of our role tonight and through BetaKit is to make sure that people are hearing the stories of the incredible innovation that's happening here. So Josh, I want to start with you a little bit. Just give people the Coles Notes version of how you became Person of the Year and the company that you built.
I think it was a slow year at BC Tech, so I'm always there for the call in case you need someone. I'm a good backup filler. Tech wasn't really I wasn't ever going to really work in tech because the university wasn't in my path. Growing up in northern BC with very blue collar working class and a single mom raising me and the whole family sort of working in traditional industry. So I worked in hospitality for years, and then after that I went to infotech and got sort of micro-credentialed and started building websites, and been working in tech for 25 years, and then started a small little game studio called Eastside Games. And our whole thesis for that was everyone's a gamer, so let's just make really, I think one of the first news outlets that wrote about us said we made counterculture games, so I'll just say that. So we made like really weird Muppet Show type games and put them out there from genres that we thought we could reach, and we grew that from 12 people to 200 people, $100 million top line revenue, and exited on the TSX. I stayed for a couple of years, and now I advise and invest in Indigenous-based businesses, and I'm usually the first check they get and try to help them sort of get out there in the world and not take money if they don't need to.
When I called you, you said, I don't know why everybody keeps asking for my opinions. I just made a Trailer Park Boys game.
Yeah, totally.
I want you to tell the room what you think is the state of BC tech or Vancouver tech right now. Is there a state? Is there a way to sum up what's going on here?
I mean, it's confusing. Like you said before, we're a province without a government right now. It's always kind of like that. We're kind of on the West Coast. Our votes are counted last when they're looking at a federal election. So it's like, in all sense of Canada, we're almost like our own little thing over here. So I think entrepreneurs are different here. And I think pressure makes diamonds. So we have to work with less, and that's the way it's always been. So I think a lot of people here in BC is kind of heads down, just working to build something. And I'm really thankful for people that have paved the way before us. And I think we need to tell more of our stories and get out there and show them what BC work ethic can do. I think we also need to think about, this is BC, not just Vancouver. So we need to make sure we're really using our biggest resources, which is all of BC. If you look at some of the stats in BC, and BC Tech has some great stats, that the tech industry in 2022 outpaced all other industries in BC by 2x. So it's growing. We just have to make sure that our voices are heard with the rest of the province, with government, with those areas that haven't embraced tech yet, because that's, I think, our biggest strength into growing into places like the north, the coast, places that have the people that can be retrained and do that. Because for me, tech, it's like the new blue-collar job. It's going to be what youth are doing. It's what I did to become CEO, is just learned on the job and just be able to work at a company that can facilitate that, and to help train our great workforce that we have here in BC.
You told me last week that you think that there are some things that BC gets really right when it comes to tech. And I think you were talking about the specificity of some of the verticals that get support or get attention or sort of draw people in. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I can talk about the verticals that I know. I think gaming, we're one of the top clusters in the world. If BC was its own country, please nobody push that out there that Josh thinks BC should. I don't need any Cascadia stuff in my feed, But if we were our own country, we'd still be in the top 10, maybe top 15 in the world in terms of just GDP output for games. I think games tech is also huge here. We have lots of offices from companies that touch on that. Obviously, climate tech is growing. A whole bunch of other industries. Entertainment's still huge, including movies and production, and technology around that is growing. Animation is huge here. We're one of the big centers throughout the world, and Canada is also a leader in that. So most of the animation that you watch is actually made right here. I think we need to do a better job of telling people it's from here, but we're definitely producing the people that can grow your business, can build that tech, and can make you successful are right here in this province.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, you can hire, there's a reason why years ago Facebook came here and created a office just to basically get people to work here, and then to try to get them to go down to work in their office in Palo Alto. Because all the, our world-class engineers are here, but from everything from artists to product managers to people that are experts at UI, UX, and people that can grow your business. They're being produced from here, not only from schools, but from the companies that are becoming anchors, and then people are leaving and having new companies. When we first started in games, there was a bunch of us that started at the same time that really thought that in 2011, everyone was talking about there's no companies. They're all coming here. They're using the tax credits for games, and then they're leaving. And so the sky was falling. So a whole bunch of local companies started at that time, and they went on to either exit or grow these new anchor companies we have. So there's lots of us. There was ATA, who got sold. There was Eastside Games. There was Ayugo, who also got sold, to grow into 200 plus people studios that are making world-class titles.
You told me it was the best talent pool in the world. You also told me it was the best place to bootstrap a company. Why do you think that is?
Maybe that's just what I know. But we didn't raise any money to grow Eastside Games into that. We were lucky enough to work with a serial entrepreneur founder that put the money in, that we were able to work with that. So I think we had a pre-talk before this, and we think maybe Vancouver is just, or BC is just kind of getting there. We're not there yet, but it's coming there, where people are exiting, they're being successful, they're staying here, and they're investing in future businesses.
What do you want to happen next if we're just getting there? What do you think is the next thing that needs to happen?
I think we do a real shit job of helping. I think there's an okay job for people that have a business and are looking to scale up, or want to be able to get some help to get to that next stage of their business. I think that's not bad. But if you're just starting out, I think it's really hard to get those small amounts to be able to start out to even get to pre-seed, to meet somebody, whereas other places it's not so hard. And especially if we're looking at making our tech and our game space inclusive, which everyone talks about that they want to, we need some help in order to facilitate that, to be able to figure out how we make it inclusive so it's not more of the same than it has to be. And in other industries, it's not like that. In other industries, I think it's a lot easier to get that early funding. Like an example of that is when you're looking at early fund. Say you make a game. Say an Indigenous creator makes a game, and they're able to get that game into pre-funding, and then they're able to show it at a couple of the great shows like Imaginative, and they're able to get lots of views. When they want to take it to that next step and be a business, there's not a lot of that funding available for people that first step. So, and then VCs can take a look at it and say, okay, that makes sense. It's a business. We can move forward. So that bridge funding, we don't have a lot of it. And I think governments and even VCs have a hard time wrapping their head around it. That's not a lot of amount for those, that next step, those $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 amounts to really push that forward. But I think that would drive tremendous change, especially around some of the big problems we're trying to solve in this province.
What do you see as the big problems that you're trying to solve here? Do you think you're focused on the right thing, or are there problems that you want people to be paying more attention to?
Yeah, it's a big question. That could be a whole other town hall. I think everyone's kind of talking about these problems we need to solve in BC, and the way to solve that is not to do it the way we've always done it. So let's take a environmental problem. Let's look at the forest fires we have every year. The best way that we can solve that is to work with organizations where they live in those places where it happens, and try to get them that seed funding they need to have innovative solutions to problems that are persisting, and we can't just be reactive to that. On the flip side of that, if you talk to the government about forest fires and what their budget is to fight them, it's whatever it takes. So why aren't we allocating $2 or $3 million towards startups to try to figure out, how do we solve this? How do we use drone technology to go in to map it? How do we use better data points to look at this versus just being reactive to something like that?
Yeah. I want to shift over to you, Anne, because I find that the creation story of AbCellera is interesting to me because it actually involves some forethought, not from the Canadian government, from the US government, who recognized that the work that had come out of UBC might be useful if there was ever a pandemic, and got involved with AbCellera before there was a pandemic. And I was hoping you just tell a little bit about the sort of the creation of AbCellera and how that came about.
Sure. So AbCellera, first of all, is a technology company at its core, but the application is in life sciences. So it has built a capability to discover very quickly antibodies that that a human body or a natural immune response to a foreign pathogen creates. And through the technology, the company can quickly screen all of the antibodies that your body creates, about a billion different options, finds one that is the optimal antibody to be used as a therapy for people more broadly, and then optimizes that antibody and characterizes it, and then turns it into a drug that can be used in patients, in a nutshell.
Easy peasy.
No problem. Yeah, early on, so the company started as a platform technology to do that, and very early on was looking for ways to enable partners in that drug discovery timeline. That's the very first step of drug development, is in the discovery stages. It's a very long path, and it involves a lot of different partners and stakeholders. And so the business model of AbCellera started very much in a partnership model. And we partnered with industry, with larger pharmaceutical companies, but we also partnered with government. And so very early on in the life cycle of AbCellera, we partnered with the Department of Defense in the US, and it was part of a pandemic preparedness initiative. And we applied our technology to see if we could be efficient in responding to a potential threat, and we had simulations that we ran in advance of COVID. And so when COVID hit, we were very well positioned to accept the first patient sample of somebody who had recovered from COVID. We were able to screen the blood sample and find an optimal antibody that could be then used in therapy. And that was turned into the first therapy that was approved by the US FDA and in Canada as well by Health Canada. It ended up treating over 2.5 million patients and estimated to have reduced about 100,000 hospitalizations. Through that, the company was able to get a couple of things. So one, it accelerated our visibility, and we were able to take advantage of that momentum and go the public market route to accelerate our growth as well as an organization. So we are now listed on the NASDAQ. And the revenues that came in from the COVID therapies have been able to be reinvested in the company and to accelerate our growth as well, and the continued investment in our infrastructure.
I think a lot of companies and founders can probably relate to an experience of finding early support, early investment, early recognition outside of Canada. Did the company think about leaving?
So because the technology came from UBC, the founding group and the management groups that were added very shortly after that were very patriotic to be Canadian, almost stubbornly so. And so at different time points in the evolution of the company and at different decision points where you have to make significant investments in infrastructure to continue to grow, there was, of course, a fiduciary duty to question whether Canada is the right jurisdiction to grow and to build roots in. And when the answer was kind of leaning to no, we would reach out to our local governments, provincially, federally, and say, listen, like, we have a very big vision. We know that we can do something special here. We are a Canadian. Help us stay here. And so that's where the genesis of a few of the partnerships with government came from, and we've been able to anchor and continue our growth here.
We were debating backstage what it means to be an anchor company in Vancouver, what that metric is, but you're considered one here. What is the focus now? Like, what are you guys trying to achieve in this city, in the country, in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I mentioned before that at the start of the company's evolution, it was more of a platform type business model where we were enabling other companies, large pharma companies, to develop drugs against targets for different diseases. We have now, through the investments that we've been able to make in our capabilities, we've expanded through to manufacturing. So now we complete the cycle from target discovery through to manufacturing, all here in Vancouver. And so we have refocused our energy to invest in our own programs. So we identify the targets of interest, we fully own the programs, and we advance those ourselves all the way through to phase 1 clinical trials. This was an evolution of the company that we had always intended to move towards. The intentionality of doing that in Canada was supported by the provincial governments and the federal governments, and I can't emphasize that enough because a lot of the infrastructure that we needed wasn't just our own, but it also is what exists in the ecosystem around us, and we have been building that as we've been growing too, and so it's taken sort of that extra amount of consideration to do that.
Life sciences is something you think about when you think about BC tech, but such long timelines, right? So much infrastructure that's needed. What do you see as like the future of the sector? What do you want to see happen with life sciences in BC?
Yeah, so specifically in BC, we are so rich in innovation here. We have some fantastic academic institutions, some great research coming out of it, and we've always been really good at starting companies. Historically, we've seen those companies exit too early, typically because the talent doesn't exist for that next stage of evolution of the company, or the capital isn't available, or the infrastructure isn't here. And so we see that evolving now, and that's maturing as companies like AbCellera grow. There's talent that kind of grows with it, and then just naturally there's a cycle in the sector and in the ecosystem that helps other companies stay and grow longer. So that's something that we're already starting to see, and it's not that it started with AbCellera. There's been 20 years of companies that have been sort of slowly starting and growing, and then they exit just that little bit further, and we keep sort of pushing the boundaries a little bit more and more, and I think that's going to ultimately make a huge impact for retaining IP and being able to commercialize our IP a little bit better.
Are there specific challenges or obstacles that you guys are working through here?
Yeah, of course. I think just like any other tech-related company, I think there's going back to sort of the decision-making of where you grow your company. One of the metrics is the incentive structures that are in place by governments to do R&D, to house IP, to commercialize, how you're recognizing revenues. So there's a lot of those specific policies that we're working with government to fit a little bit better to the growth story of life sciences companies, and probably with tech companies as well, both at the federal and at the provincial level, that I think will make a big impact. It impacts everything from how to attract talent. That's really important. But what we're working towards as well is, as we're growing in new areas of drug development here that we've never chartered grounds before, we're working with academic institutions too to develop skilled training programs that are relevant for those new stages that we can then recruit from.
Do you think that life sciences is considered enough of a priority in Canada?
Honestly, so I've worked very closely with the sector for my whole career, and I think both federally and provincially, I mean, we'll see what happens this week provincially, but we've seen a lot of support and a lot of desire to understand the sector more and how they can contribute and how to support. I mean, I think that's been asked of me a number of times from government people, both at the federal and provincial level, to be very specific about what it is that they can do to help grow and help retain companies to the next level.
Yeah. And what do you tell them? What do you tell them that they should do?
So they've been great funding partners for us and for our sector for identifying the right growth stage companies to invest in and support at the right times. But there are policies that could benefit from a refresh, and I know that some of them are under consideration right now. There's the Shred Credit program. That's one that's very specific and very misaligned, I would say, especially with the long timelines of a life sciences company. The average life sciences company takes 15 years to see proper commercial revenues. You can exit earlier through licenses and things, but it's a very long pathway. It takes $1 billion to get there. You're gonna need external capital. You'll probably need to go public very early, pre-revenue. And the Shred Credit program doesn't quite take that into consideration in the right way. So you don't get the cash credit component once you go public, and I think it's just a misalignment right now. So that's one specific program. If you're looking, there's a few others as well. I mean, there's different ways to incentivize IP being housed here through different patent box mechanisms, more at the federal level. Yeah, those are a couple of examples.
Yeah, I think I asked you if you could snap your fingers and change one thing, what would it be? And I think you said shred pretty fast.
Yeah, I've lived that a few times now in different companies, and it's just the reality of the companies in this sector.
Yeah. Ali, I want to shift over to you. We were talking backstage about, some of the things we've been hearing in Toronto from the sector, some of the talk about what it's like to build in Canada right now, some of the obstacles people are facing, some of the temptations they're thinking of, feeling in terms of going elsewhere, things, the barriers. And you were surprised by that.
I also don't get out much. I feel like I'm surprised by a lot of things in this world, pretty much constantly, the tech sector. I came from small business originally, so when you come from a different part of the industry and then you come into the tech world, it's actually kind of weird. But people who are in the tech world only don't recognize the strangeness of it always. But I think just our personal story has been there's been no pressure to leave. We heard that this was something that used to happen where people would be pressured to go down to San Francisco if they wanted to build or get funding. But even early on, there was lots of firms that had a different investment thesis than the Valley, like growth at all cost. And they were actually really actively sourcing in Canada. They wanted a more diverse portfolio. And interestingly, I think they were the ones that had that more long-term view, and I think they had a healthier investment thesis. And so I think Canadians might have benefited from their attention, actually, going outside of the Valley. I think I was just surprised to hear that was still a thing, because I felt like I thought it was a thing, and now I thought it wasn't, and now I'm like, it's back again, and I don't really understand why, because we've never seen any detriment to building in Canada, and if anything, we've actually seen a lot of benefits.
Yeah. And have you had, have you seen a barrier to raising here? Is access to capital a problem?
No, but I always say that we have Clio in our backyard, and we're basically a Clio for a different industry. So everyone's like, we're in town visiting Clio, can we come by? And we're like, okay. So everyone, I just think, and I mean, that's the perfect example of what we were talking about, where if you have someone charting the path for you, you end up building an ecosystem where success follows for lots of companies. We have the talent pool. Jack's always been very generous with advice and sharing the experience within his team, with our team. So it comes in so many different forms, including investors being in town and being interested in your company.
Yeah. So taking it as a given that you don't go out much, where do you think the city's at in that cycle? Do you think you have enough of those anchor companies, enough reasons that people are coming in and looking to meet with other founders and other companies?
No, I think we're still babies, because I think we're still babies as companies, but it was, we were just talking about, you were I wasn't ambitious enough with my company. And I feel like that's been a bit of the story is also sell at 50 million. And I don't know if that means revenue or valuation or what does that mean 50 million, that's how much I'm gonna get? Or that's what that meant, right? Canadians, you've all heard this number before, I think. So I think we just sometimes haven't been aggressive enough, but when you have companies ahead of you, you're just like, well, I'll just do what they're doing. I'm just gonna like follow that path and chase after that. But I think we're still super early. Like we consider ourselves really small. And like we're talking now to companies who have $1 billion in revenue from SMB, and that's also a new thing, not just locally, but in the ecosystem. For us, SMB wasn't a market that anyone thought could get to any like reasonable size. And so when you see those companies even across all of North America, you're like, okay, well, I guess SMB is big enough, we can get there too. Just feels like we're very early. I think we're very, very early. And you see it not just in tech, but like alternative foods, like when you had Daya and Smart Sweets, then you see all these alternative foods pop up. I just talked to the founder of Kiwi Chips, I think, and there's just like, there's knowledge, there's experience, there's our lawyer also does all the alternative foods companies. So now he's like sitting on their boards, and there's just such information sharing that happens. But I think we're early, yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a bold ambition? And when you hear people talk about, there's conversation about with Canadian productivity, is our ambition high enough? Are we setting ourselves big goals? Have you thought about that in your journey with your company? Have you set yourself ambitions that you think about all the time?
Well, we were accidental entrepreneurs, so we didn't have this big we thought we were like, our original business model that Trevor sold me on was like, oh, it's a side hustle, so we'll just build an app and you'll just put it out there and it'll just like rake in cash and we'll just do nothing, basically. That was the story. And the whole business plan, I think, had 20 people, and now we have 550. It's a full-time job. It's certainly not a side hustle. But we had I had a spreadsheet on my computer for a long time that was passed to 100 million in revenue, and it was so awesome because it just showed all of these companies and their different paths to 100 million, and they were very varied. Like there wasn't one story. And it was how much revenue it took every year for them to get to 100 million, and then their revenue post 100 million. And I hadn't actually really thought past that moment, and we just hit 100 million this year. And I'm like, now what are we doing? So then we sat down and we just were like, okay, let's go to $1 billion. So then we just were like, what happens? What's the story to there? And I think 0 to 5 million was actually harder than 50 to 100 million. Like once you hit a certain sort of path, it just feels like you just keep doing more of the same. And then now 100 to 250 million seems like more accessible. But if you'd said that to me when we first started the company, I'd been like, are you insane? Like that is a lot of money. And actually every time we hit a size that Jack's been at, I'm like, okay, we should give ourselves some credit, because when Clio was this size, we were like, Clio, they're so incredible. Like, this is so amazing. And then we hit the same size, and we're like, ugh, we're so small. Like, why is this taking so long? We're not doing very well. Yeah. It's really hard to take, your own story and see the wins. Yeah. I think when you're an entrepreneur especially, everything's not going well when you're an entrepreneur.
You talked a little bit about that transition from thinking of yourself as a small business owner to thinking about yourself being in tech. Is there a mindset that you see in the tech sector that you think people need to get over?
I think everyone should go run a small business and then come back to me. Running a small business is so hard, and the margins are low, and you have to work your butt off. And so I think it just creates a different perspective on the tech sector. I think there's also literally no government support. There's actually negative government support. My clinic, which I ran for 10 years and just transitioned to new owners during the pandemic, my landlord was the district. Is anyone here from the district? I'm about to say something quite mean. My landlord was the District of North Vancouver. And they would not give us rent relief or the rent relief program because in our bylaws it says that the district is not allowed to give any priority or special treatment to any business. And I'm like, it's a fucking pandemic, people. This was not why the bylaws were written. And they were just like, nope, sorry. So I was personally paying rent while we were closed. I was getting rent relief from the federal government to pay to my municipal government. I was like, thank you, government, for this relief. Let me just pay it to my local government because they won't give us any rent relief. Being a small business is the most stressful, difficult thing. And then now we're we're getting millions in TRED credits. And I was part of the Women's Entrepreneur Program. You're getting so much money. And it's just oh, thank you. I'll take all this money and be grateful for it. But man, it's hard in small business. So sometimes I forget we still have to fight. I'm like, okay, we should go fight for more. But when I hear what Ontario gets, I'm like, BC. Yeah. Ontario gets way more than us. Did you know that? That their provincial funding is way higher than BC's? that gets me competitive.
You can take it up with your new government.
I don't know
if
which
and
one.
when
The
you
two
get
Greens
one.
have all the power. The two Greens have all the power, and there's one in Squamish. So I'll go visit him regularly.
It's not a terrible negotiating spot to be in for the sector, right? With a new government or a tenuous government. What would you ask for if you had them in the room?
See, I'm a terrible tech entrepreneur because our customers are all small business, and I would advocate for them. I'd be like, let's get the small businesses more support, please, because I think they're not totally undervalued layer of the economy, and I think that was proven actually during the pandemic because they gave all the support directly to the employees, and suddenly they realized like, oh shoot, we should have actually been giving it to the employers to keep paying people because they laid everyone off, and then they tried to kind of reverse track, but the small business layer employs like a huge number of people. This is not the audience for this conversation, but I'm very passionate about it, and it's why I think it's
Absolutely the audience.
Is it? Oh, small business. Okay, we like it. And then I also think non-dilutive funding. I think that's come up a few times, but non-dilutive funding, and I think at that smaller size, we entered the New Ventures competition when we first started. It was the first thing we ever did to get into the tech ecosystem, and it was only because there was a cash prize. We're like, cash? Yes, we will be there. And we didn't know anything about it. We had no plans on fundraising. We just literally were there, and we just like made stuff up. We're like, here's, I guess, what we would do if we were going to raise money, but we've always been profitable, and we didn't need to raise at the time.
Yeah, I like that. More cash prizes.
Cash prizes.
Yeah. You said something to me when we talked last week that I wanted you to talk a little bit about. You talked about the concept of delight for your customers and that you wanted to reorient the company a little bit about focusing on delight. When we did our town hall with Toby, somebody asked him if Canada could be known for one thing, what would you want it to be? And he said craft. He's like, I would like us to be known for building really beautiful things. Can you talk a little bit about how that factors and how does delight factor into what you do? Because I don't hear people talk about that much.
Yeah, I tell my team all the time feelings are a metric, and I think they are, and we don't actually ask people enough about their feelings. You can actually survey for feelings. You can turn it into a data point, and your data people can be happy with you. And you'd be like, we're going to run a red to green on feelings, and people will be very excited about that. You're like, great. You just need to ask the right questions. And I think we realized we have a brand promise of human and helpful. And whenever we're talking to anybody, the support that we give obviously I have a heart for small business, so the support and the delight that we want to give to our customers comes up both in our product design and then also in the way that we support the product. But I think that the problem is that I've lost my train of thought.
What's the problem with delight?
There's no problem with delight. Yeah. I know what I was going to say. Okay, so we obviously hire in Canada all the time, and so I think there's 5 minutes left. I'm supposed to call it out in case you don't see it.
Thank you.
She's very aware. Canadians, we're very Canadian, which is like why we sell at 50 million, but we're also very delightful humans. Like we're very nice. And so we started trying to hire a few people outside of Canada for support, and it didn't go very well. And so we're like, we actually think we should market. Like it's a fully Canadian support team. And the US people it's very internationally beloved. So I think we can be known for delight in Canada, like our humanness.
I like that. Before I go to Scott with the time we have left, you said to me that it wasn't a barrier being in Canada as much as it's a barrier sometimes being on the West Coast when it comes to hiring. Can you talk about that?
That's just recently. So we're looking for people that have scaled from our size to the next size, and especially selling to SMB and vertical SaaS. And it's like a kind of specific skill set. And there's just not very many of them. And the ones that are on the East Coast, interestingly, they just think we're very far away. So I think they'd work with Toronto, I call Toronto the HQ of Canada. It's like, oh, the HQ. Okay, everyone will go to the HQ of Canada. But even though we're like a totally remote company, we're like, this has zero effect. Like we'll travel anywhere, we'll make it work with our executive team. It seems like far away to people for some reason. So I think executive talent, especially, I don't know. You can ask Jack about it too. I'd be interested to know if he's finding that. But otherwise, and then we're a little bit divided from like the Toronto scene. So Canada gets a little bit split into two.
Yeah. What's the value prop that you give people when you're trying to get them to work for a West Coast company or a Vancouver company?
It actually just was like a bit of a red flag for me on this recent candidate, because I'm like, that's just a very solvable problem. This is just logistics. Like, if this is a barrier to join our company, then I'm going to say, like, maybe that's not the best call. But it's weird to say you're located somewhere, because while we're here in our office, our empty office is here, our team is actually really spread out, and we continue to hire across the whole continent, and actually even the UK. And so I just think it's interesting to even think, are you a BC-based company? Like, at what point, I don't even know. Like, how long are we allowed to say that? Do we have to have how many employees do we have to have here? Is it just tax? Is that the only thing about being here? I was driving my kids to school, and we're talking about the election, and I'm like, okay, but here's the thing so I'm trying to decide who to vote for. I won't bring up too many things about politics here, but I'm like, here's the thing, like, I'm all for social programs, like, that's really important to me, but there has to be fiscal responsibility, and I'm trying to explain to them, like, you have to be able to pay for the social programs. I said, if you tax people too much, then they just leave, and then instead of having some of a lot, you have, like, a lot of nothing. So I'm like, the math just doesn't make sense. So we do have to figure out, I think, especially as we become a more remote kind of culture, there's less reason to stay somewhere. Like, it is just a taxation question. And supporting where you are. So I'm curious to see how remote environment changes people's headquarters. If we move to Calgary, we would save so much money. Like, I think we would pay, our CFO is always like, Calgary, guys, and we're like, we're not moving to Calgary. It doesn't matter, we just be like on paper. Like, you don't even have to change anything.
Yeah. Scott, you are very focused right now on place and your desire for Vancouver to be a place where people decide to build, where they want to do things. You've left, you've come back. Why is the idea of place, and of this place specifically, important to you?
I want to make Vancouver a place where young people can build the future. And from what I've seen growing up in northern BC and then coming here for university, I struggled to find, people to build startups with. And went through a whole host of problems figuring out where do I find those people. But eventually, I found them through a community that I started called Atelier, where people co-work on a bunch of various projects. Everything from, I've seen mind-controlling cockroaches by implanting electrodes in them, to my friend making drones that detect landmines, music, video games, everything in between. And to me, as a young person, it's not, tax policy or all of these like government things that seem very out of my control. Those are not the reasons why I choose to stay here after traveling abroad. The main thing is the people. And I found my people here through the community that I help run. And we are just starting out in terms of being very curious-minded, getting in the reps of making various projects that then get us to become very ambitious. Some of the ambitious people, the problem is that my friends all end up leaving to San Francisco because they realize that there's not really that much in Vancouver for them, or that's how they feel.
Is that true? Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think that that's true, or do you think it's the stories that they're hearing or the ones that they're not?
Well, from what I heard today and the conversations I've been having over the last month since starting to work on this and coming back to Vancouver, there is a lot that's happening here. I mean, in terms of movies, gaming, life sciences, and yet these are not the stories that I hear told among my peers, and I think that's the problem that we need to fix here, because the heroes that we have as young people are mostly in the US.
Don't say Elon. Is it Elon?
For some people.
Yeah. So how are you going to do that? How do you fix that here? How do you build heroes and mythology around the companies that are here, you think? What do you need the sector to do? What do you need people to show up and help you with?
That's a great question. I think there's three things that young people need here in Vancouver. First is a culture of reinvestment, giving back. I think that's what made Waterloo, what Waterloo is today, is Research in Motion, where now known as BlackBerry decided to invest in 20 buildings right next to the campus, a bunch of money, hired a bunch of students, and I don't see a lot of that here in Vancouver. So even just like if, it would be huge if just, a few of the successful founders in the room found a way to take a look at what young people are doing here and provide, maybe it's capital or space. Second is mentorship. I've been through accelerator programs, internships, networking events. I show up to a networking event as a young person. If I have student on my badge, no one wants to talk to me. If I go to an internship, usually, like most of my internships in Canada ended up being 1 hour Zoom call a day on a stand-up, and then like trying to figure out, how I'm supposed to do my job. And then if I decide to get into an accelerator program, some people manage to get to that level of ambition, which I've done a couple of them. Generally, like we're being asked the moment that we think of an idea, like, oh, what is your business plan? Or who are your competitors? Like you said, there's a lot of people that stumble into entrepreneurship accidentally. And that's what all of my peers are doing. They're all building just random things for the fun of it. And I think that that's really like what gets people, that's how innovation actually happens, is people just making stuff for the fun of it because they love it. And so we need better mentorship that supports that beyond, internships and whatnot. My last point on this, though, this is the part that matters most to me for what young people, I think, need, is belief. I wouldn't be here on this stage if it wasn't for a couple of people that have a couple of decades more experience than me, who decided, hey, maybe this young guy is doing something interesting, and I want to believe in you, and I want to spend a lot of time with you helping you accomplish your goals. And I think, like I said, people is really what it comes down to at the end of the day. I don't think it's going to be like a tax policy thing that changes whether or not we make this city a place where we have a very ambitious culture in 10 years. I think it's going to be because of young people. And in order to enable that, I think you need to have the older generation giving back in a way where instead of asking, as soon as they hear a new idea, what is your business plan or who are your competitors, but instead, just offering their belief. And then maybe young people like me will see the potential to stay in Vancouver.
I feel bad that I was skeptical about the radar on the cockroaches last night. I wasn't sure how they were going to use that, but do you have an ask for the people on the stage at all?
Like over here?
Yeah.
Well, it's those three things, capital, mentorship, and belief. Tomorrow I'm starting a new organization that's meant to bridge this gap between people that are ambitious and people that are accomplished. It's called V2, and we're going to run a bunch of different experiments to make this happen. But it starts with a collective of everyone in Vancouver that's making things. And so if we can assemble all of these people that are working on things behind closed doors, bring them into formats beyond just networking events and some internships, where they can actually be in the same room as someone, learn from them. That's what it's about for me. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to share the stories of what young people are doing in Canada and in Vancouver.
Amazing. We're going to do one quick speed round before we move on to the next section. I want each of you to tell the room if there was one person or one company's story that they should know about in BC, in Vancouver, who would you point to? Who do you think people should know more about in this town, in this province? You got one, Josh?
Yeah, I have lots. I think Ray Wally at Launch Academy, definitely, yeah. And his colleague that has the best sneakers in the game. But yeah, follow what Ray's done. He rented a desk for me at one time when we were starting up, and like what he's grown now, and the amount of volume that he brings in and quality that he brings in, not only of helping entrepreneurs here, but investments and traveling around the world and telling everyone from Asia to Europe about what we're building here is phenomenal. He's a pretty modest guy, so he doesn't pat his own back enough, but you definitely should go for a coffee with Ray.
There's a lot to choose from in the life sciences space, a lot of high levels of innovation. I would probably point to a person rather than a company, because this person has started about half a dozen or a dozen companies, but it would be Peter Cullis. And he, he was responsible for the technology that allowed a lot of the mRNA vaccines to be delivered, the LNP technology. He had this idea. He recognized the steps that it would need to take to actually commercialize that idea. He saw the applications for it, and he would start different companies that would focus in on those different applications. It was the conviction, the foresight, the dedication, and the innovation that really has made a huge impact worldwide.
Got one?
I want to tell about a small business story.
Just do it.
It's terrible, but literally I'm like sitting at a cafe last weekend and the guy beside me was using Jane, and that never, like, always shocks me. I'm always like, that guy's using Jane. And I was like sitting with Trevor, I'm like, I'm going to talk to him. And this guy, like, he's a kin and he started his own business using Jane, and his whole business is all about helping people with chronic conditions maintain their mobility while they're going through chronic decline, basically. And as we're talking, it's his grandmother had Parkinson's, and he watched her decline over time, and then he wanted to go into business specifically serving this population. And this is what this man does with his whole life, is he spends time working with our platform, which is like such an honor to work with his community to help people going through chronic pain and degenerative conditions. It's just like everyone should know about this man.
What's
you should
his
all
name?
know his name, Bav. He's so lovely. You should all know his name and his company.
What's the name of the company? We'll drop it in the chat afterwards.
You should all know the name, and I definitely know it. He literally just
right.
emailed me because I asked him if he'll come talk to our whole company. So.
Everyone will Google
It's
Bab
called like
after
Embrace,
this.
Empower. I'll find it.
Scott, how about you?
I want to shout out someone who inspires me every day to think beyond just, what my first company was in software. He's in this room. His name is Neil Mitra, and he started a company when he was 16 that helps. Right now, still in R&D, but I don't know how much I'm allowed to say, Neil. But basically, speeding up how fast you can get lab results on things relating to blood plasma. Yeah, pretty accurate. Okay.
Close enough.
And for me, it's like, if we want to make this place somewhere where we actually build the future beyond, just the typical companies that we might hear about, we need to be inspired by more peers across disciplines, and that's why Neil comes to mind.
That's amazing. Well, I want to thank all of you for offering some of that inspiration across disciplines tonight. I'm sorry we don't have more time. I could talk to all of you forever. But let's have a big round of applause for our Vantage Points panel.